I'm sure you know Robert O'Brien is feeling fine. I mean, he's not going to be off for a long period of time. And you know, he began the series of four speeches that ended up with Secretary of State Pompeo at the Nixon Library last week. What did you make of the Pompeo speech on China?
I thought it was an excellent speech, and I really think when you consider it as part of the speeches that Robert gave, the speech that FBI Director Wray gave, and the speech that Attorney General Barr gave, I mean, this I can't think of a parallel in recent history where you have all the major national security voices in an administration on a single theme, touching on different elements of that theme, but pushing coercion and the deception of the Chinese Communist Party, but really making an affirmative case for the free world and for American values. So I really commend Secretary Pompeo for it. I thought he chose a great venue for it as well, and I thought the Q&A that you led after was very revealing, and so very well done by both you and Secretary Pompeo.
You know, the actual sequence of speeches begins with Vice President Pence giving two speeches on China last year. I wouldn't be surprised if the president follows up with this. And this goes to my point, Mike Gallagher. Congressman Nick Lemon of the New Yorker called me up yesterday. He's doing a big story on President Trump. What has he accomplished and what has he done to the Republican Party? And my number one, I made a list of his accomplishments. I think President Trump's number one accomplishment is to clarify the relationship with the Chinese Communist Party and to infuse America with conviction that it must oppose their agenda at every turn. I think that's number one, even ahead of judges. What do you think?
I agree with that 100%. I mean, you can. This is the biggest shift in U.S. grand strategy since the end of the Cold War. And the Trump administration deserves enormous credit for it. I suspect when the history of the new Cold War is written, we will get a lot of insight into all the documents that preceded Vice President Pence's exceptional speech at the Hudson Institute, which is when you had commentators like Walter Russell Mead and Neil Ferguson start to talk openly about, are we in a Cold War II right now? It really is remarkable. And I think evidence that this is going to endure beyond the Trump administration, almost regardless of who wins in November, can be found in the fact that at times now Biden is trying to walk away from his previous accommodationist views on China, some of the nice things he said about General Secretary Xi, and in some cases trying to run to the right of Trump on China and attack Trump on China. So when your opponents are doing something like that, you know you're on to something. And I think that reflects the fact that the American people, by and large, support this shift. They may not be talking in bar rooms about, how China's accession to the WTO was a disaster for Midwestern manufacturing, though it was, but they do have a sense that we are starting, or we are at the early stages of a struggle between two really competing systems and ideologies. Or if nothing else, they have a sense that China is a massive bully on the world stage, and the Chinese Communist Party is forcing everybody, whether it's LeBron James or Hollywood executives or hedge fund managers, to bend the knee and accept Communist Party values as opposed to American values.
I think they're also becoming aware that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of People Liberation Army agents in the United States, and this is for keeps. This is not some kind of a trade deal. This is a for keeps competition over who will be in charge of the world, and China intends to be in charge of the world, or more specifically, the Chinese Communist Party. Something you said, though, I want to make sure you really believe it. Can the Democrats reverse this and go back to appeasement? Because I think the Obama years was marked by appeasement of Iran and China and of Russia when they invaded Crimea. I think the Trump years are marked by nice talk, but very tough action, and that he's trying to do what Bush did after 9/11, which is to cement in a structure that cannot be reversed. And Trump and Pompeo and O'Brien and they're all trying to put into place a policy that cannot be reversed. Do you think it is permanent, Mike Gallagher?
Well, I do, but that's not to say. I mean, there is a faction within the Democratic Party and within Joe Biden's foreign policy advisory structure that believes that tension in the relationship between U.S. and China is just a function of President Trump, which is obviously wrong because this is purely a function of Chinese Communist Party aggression, and this actually predates General Secretary Xi in many cases. So I think if Joe Biden comes into office and tries to reverse course and tries to accommodate the CCP, it will fail, and the CCP will guarantee that it fails, and they will not moderate their aggression at all. And then I think he will be met by the overwhelming disapproval of the American people. So that's why I say that this is irreversible. And I would say this isn't just a matter of obscure foreign policy issues. This is a matter of our domestic economy. So I think the most difficult part of this, as we've talked about before, is that to prevail against the CCP, we're going to have to do some smart form of selective economic decoupling and invest in domestic industries or in closer relationships with our allied partners when it comes to rare earths, semiconductors, chip manufacturing, and things like that. And that's going to have huge ramifications for our domestic economic policy over the next 2 decades.
At the end of my and pharmaceuticals, I would add that. At the end of my
Absolutely.
conversation with the secretary, I asked him as a West Point guy, could he admit that we have to shift the Pentagon budget from Army towards Navy? And while he hemmed and hawed, he basically said yes. And nevertheless, I see your Democratic colleagues complaining bitterly that in another $1 trillion of spending coming down the railroad, they don't even want to spend $20 billion on the Navy. It's nothing. It's 2%. What is wrong with them? This is like saying we didn't want to fight the Soviet Union during the nuclear freeze. We didn't want to oppose them. What is wrong with your Democratic counterpart?
Well, it also requires you to not only ignore the geographic realities of Indo-PACOM, our priority theater, but just to ignore very recent and troubling history with what happened in Hong Kong. And if you don't think that portends something bad for Taiwan, you're simply not paying attention. It's my belief that Taiwan is General Secretary Xi's legacy issue. As one of my good friends, a real China expert, said the other day, if you give General Secretary Xi the choice between occupying Taiwan by force, but also losing his Navy in the process, he would not blink and he would not hesitate to sacrifice the PLA Navy for the sake of securing that legacy objective. And so we need to stand up against CCP aggression in Indo-PACOM, and that's going to require a much bigger investment in the U.S. Navy, but also in an integrated naval force. And luckily, we've seen a lot of innovative thinking coming from the Commandant of the Marine Corps. Now it's incumbent upon us to demand from the leadership of the Navy and the new Secretary of the Navy that plan for an integrated naval force structure assessment and fund it. And I will say, I know we're going to have this debate over the HEALS Act in the Senate. It does have a very modest investment in the Navy that's positive, including $1 billion for Navy P-8 planes, $2 billion for F-35s, C-130s, and A-10 wing replacement, and $2.2 billion for shipbuilding. So that is a small investment when you look at the scope of the challenge we face in Indo-PACOM, and it's not going to get any better. The final thing I say, Q, I know the Navy's gotten a lot of criticism recently for all these incidents, the latest of which is the Bonhomme Richard fire. And we're really debating this question of whether the Navy has a cultural problem. I think it's fair to say that it might, but the culture is one of accomplish the mission at any cost, get the job done, right? That is the Navy ethos. That's certainly the Marine Corps ethos. And when you ask the Navy to do this massive, expansive mission, but you don't fund it with appropriate resources, you're going to have incidents like this happen. And so Congress needs to step up and not only blame the Navy, but do its part to provide resources so that we can have that vision of deterrence by denial via sea power in Indo-PACOM that's essential to implementing the Trump administration's national security strategy.
I want to underscore that because it's a chicken and egg problem. You do have a culture problem, according to the navalists, but I believe that's because there's not enough money. And they're trying to run around and operate on an 80% budget to fill 100% of their needs, and they make mistakes as a result of that. But the Navy at the same time has to ask for the money and make a case. This $20 billion is nothing, in my view. It's nothing. And yet you've got the left wing of the Democratic Party saying we can't put defense spending into a COVID bill because it doesn't make sense. It's absolutely makes sense. It's all about China. I mean, is there going to be a hearing on the money they want to put into the PAYS Act or the CARES Act 2.0, or is it just going to be hammered out in conference?
Well, I don't know if they're going to be able to get something out of the Senate. I know there was a lot of robust debate yesterday among senators, so we'll see. I worry that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are not dealing in good faith with Mitch McConnell and don't want to meet him in the middle. But it's hard for me to really see whether white smoke is emerging from the other side of the Capitol. I've given up trying to predict how senators are going to behave.
Well, okay. Let me close by asking about Xi. Um, when I asked the secretary if he thought Xi was someone you could deal with, he depersonalized it. It's not about how you tweet about someone. It's not about how you get along. It's what they do. Xi has done a number of aggressive things. I don't think we have much doubt about his agenda. At 63 or 64, he wants his agenda done in his lifetime. That's a problem that we have with authoritarians. Mike Gallagher, do you agree or disagree with that? That Xi is a particular problem because he's got an ego.
Well, I agree that Xi, through a variety of aggressive moves, has made himself the most powerful leader since Mao. Most notably eliminating term limits on his time as general secretary. And I do agree that he's accelerated the transformation of the party from the hide and bide your time approach to the assert your role on the world stage and really reassert what he views to be China's rightful role as a dominant power, not only in Indo-PACOM but globally. And I think we need to spend a lot of time, talking not only about the risks to our own security posed by the Chinese Communist Party, but really the contrast in values between our two systems. And if there's one thing that worries me more than anything else, despite the fact that we have made a lot of progress on this issue, and despite the fact that there's an underappreciated bipartisan buy-in to the fundamentals of Trump's national security strategy, it's that in contrast to the late 40s and early 50s, where we certainly had some problems with communist diversion, there really was no disagreement on the idea that we deserved to win this competition. In other words, most Americans felt like we were the good guys. I'm not sure that sentiment is widely shared today. And I think we need to spend a lot of time making the case to the leaders in our tech companies, the leaders in Hollywood, all of our cultural icons, why playing for Team America is the right side to be on, why we are the good guys and the commies and the fascists are indeed the bad guys.
It's remarkable you have to say that, but you have to say that. Congressman Mike Gallagher, good to join you. I hope by this time next week the Brewers haven't given up the season. Talk to you next week, Congressman. Let me tell you, America,